While analyzing the remains of the destroyed military aircraft, Ibrahim Traoré made an effort to identify American marks. Be removed, but they remained discernible beneath the fuselage. Defense Minister Zongo held out a metal box and said, "Mr. President, you must see this. It's not the plane's black box. It's something else." Traoré was astonished when he opened the box and saw the list of names on the screen. It included the names of the leaders of 12 African nations, and there was a date and a red mark next to his own name. On July 16, 2025, 10 days from now, the northern part of Burkina Faso was primarily arid savanna. Commercial routes avoided the area, military flights were infrequent, and aircraft rarely crashed there because Traoré's government had driven away international bases. Defense Minister Zongo sent a military reconnaissance team right away after local villagers reported a downed aircraft in the early hours of July 6, 2025, 2 years prior. The first information was vague enough to require Traoré's direct attention. Unusual cargo and an unidentified military-type aircraft with no survivors and signs of attempted destruction prior to impact. How long has the site been secured? The area was surrounded by a 3-kilometer perimeter by the time Traoré's chopper touched down close to the crash site. Traoré questioned Zongo about who had arrived hours earlier, saying, "Since 0500 hours, Mr. President, nobody has come except for our staff, who moved in the direction of the wreckage." The aircraft was a modified cargo plane built for stealth operations, and the smell of burned fuel hung in the hot air. Its charred remains suggested that someone had attempted to destroy it before or after it crashed. Any identification, Traoré asked, was looking at the fuselage where someone had attempted to sand away markings. Nothing official. But the technology signatures are U.S. Special Operations patterns of modification. There were 4 victims with military-grade physical conditioning, but no identifying paperwork or tags, and there were no survivors, sir. Professionals were circling the debris. Since the defense minister had served in several battles and was not readily agitated by crash scenes or casualties, Traoré observed Zongo's unusual stress. "Why don't you tell me?" After a moment of hesitation, Minister Zongo pointed to a junior officer who had come with a metal case about the size of a laptop computer. It was matte black, had no markings, and appeared to be undamaged despite the crash. "It's not the plane's black box, it's something else," Zongo said, taking the case from the officer. "It was in a special compartment with triple redundant shock absorption and fireproofing. Whatever this is, it was designed to survive anything." Traoré took the case, sensing its surprising weight along one edge, which was an advanced biometric scanner that wasn't working at the time. No serial number or manufacturer's logo. His chopper took off half an hour later, and there were no identifying markings of any type. "Have you unlocked it?" "No, sir. The biometric security is above our current capabilities." In just 10 days, Traoré was set to convene a momentous conference of West African leaders with the goal of forging a new economic alliance free from Western influence. As he looked down at the crash site, something about the timing appeared intentional. Was this disaster a coincidence, or was it related to the summit that Western nations had been attempting to sabotage in a secret room under the presidential palace back in Ouagadougou? "It's beyond anything I've seen, Mr. President," Traoré observed as doctor. Aminata Dio, head of Burkina Faso's recently formed cybersecurity division, inspected the enigmatic box. Its titanium ceramic composite shell quantum encryption protocols, biometric authentication that includes DNA verification, she said. There is a hairline fracture in the casing that has disrupted the security circuit. If we can take advantage of that without setting off the failsafe, how long could it be for several hours or longer as Dr. Dio's team continued their work. This isn't just secure, it's made to destroy its contents if improperly accessed. We've intercepted increased encrypted communications between Langley and their regional stations since the crash. Have they made any official inquiries? Traoré asked Foreign Minister Kabor, who shook his head. No, which is telling. Their silence confirms. This was a covert operation. They don't want to acknowledge the timing concerns. Me said. Traoré called an emergency meeting with his most trusted advisors, Defense Minister Zongo, Foreign Minister Kabori, and Intelligence Director Konite. The aircraft was almost certainly American, according to CIA Special Activities Division Konite. Traoré, the West African Economic Independence Summit, which took place 10 days prior, was the culmination of years of meticulous diplomacy. 12 countries in West Africa were ready to unveil a new economic structure that would drastically curtail Western influence. We should postpone the summit, suggested Kabor, as that might be exactly what they want. Konate countered, causing chaos and uncertainty. Before Traoré could react, his secure phone vibrated, and it was Dr. Dio, Mr. President. We've done it. The box is open. Changing commodity pricing power, establishing a regional currency backed by gold, and creating more favorable terms for partnerships with non-Western countries. 20 minutes later, Trey stood in the secure lab, gazing at the contents of the enigmatic case. Inside was a sophisticated tablet-like device that displayed data from a database called Operation Black Autumn. The screen displayed a list of names of the leaders of each of the 12 countries taking part in the next summit, along with dates, psychological profiles, and specific intervention protocols. There was a date and a red mark next to Traoré's name. The day of the summit is July 16, 2025. Traoré started having trouble finding the right words. Intelligence Director Konite's voice was tight with suppressed anger as part of a coordinated assassination and coup campaign that simultaneously targeted all independent-minded leaders in West Africa. Traoré's daily routines, the names of his security personnel, the architectural layouts of the buildings where he lived and worked, and even his medical information were all part of Black Autumn, a comprehensive plan to reset West African leadership in a single coordinated action. Military assets had already been positioned, local collaborators had been recruited, and media narratives had been prepared to explain the sudden popular uprisings that would remove these leaders. The level of detail was astounding. How did they get this intelligence? He inquired. Dr. Dio sighed. Sir, this appears to be a joint operation, not just American, the British, French, Canadians. It's a coordinated Western intelligence initiative. This was a sophisticated plot to concurrently decapitate a dozen nations that were opposing the post-colonial economic order at the summit, not just another instance of Western meddling in African politics. Traoré said in a low voice that it scared them more than we realized. Mr. President, we need to notify the other leaders right away. Defense Minister Zongo said, we need to prepare for possible accelerated action now that they've lost this intelligence package. They may move their timetable forward now that they've lost this intelligence package. We need to secure this facility, no communications in or out, except through encrypted channels that we personally approve. Dr. Dio, I want every bit of data extracted and backed up securely. He turned to his advisors, saying, we have 10 days, maybe less, to turn this attack into a historic opportunity for African sovereignty. The response from Western capitals was prompt, albeit notably indirect, and within 24 hours, the U.S. ambassador asked for an urgent meeting to discuss regional security concerns. Regarding promoting stability in West Africa, the French Foreign Ministry released a statement. Due to his hectic schedule, Troy turned down the American ambassador's request for an urgent meeting. He needed time to thoroughly comprehend what they had found and to safely communicate with the other leaders in danger. Thus, it was a purposeful delay. Traoré called a very secure virtual meeting with the other 11 leaders identified in Operation Black Autumn on the morning of July 8th. "What I am about to share will shock you," Traoré said, "but it will also confirm what many of us have long suspected." He carefully delivered the evidence over the course of the following hour, including screenshots from the database, operational specifics of the planned interventions, and intelligence obtained on each leader. Reactions varied from startled quiet to icy rage. President Mensah of Ghana was advised to go public right away after President Adama of Senegal stated that this is an act of war, not just against our individual countries, but against African self-determination itself. President Obi of Nigeria warned that if we do that, they will just speed up their plans after hearing all viewpoints. The world needs to witness this proof of Western duplicity. To get colleagues' attention, Traoré held up his hand. "I suggest a calculated tactic." He paused here and used the summit to announce not only our economic independence initiative, but also to reveal Operation Black Autumn to the world, on our terms at our chosen moment, with all of us standing together one by one. The leaders agreed that the summit would proceed, and that it would now carry even greater historical significance than originally planned. First, we each discreetly secure our positions using this intelligence. Second, we proceed with the summit as planned but with enhanced security protocols. Burkina Faso's communications infrastructure was the focus of strange electronic activity that evening, according to intelligence head Konate, who said they were testing our networks. This degree of cyber activity indicates that they firmly suspect we have their intelligence package, Mr. President. There have been sophisticated penetration attempts against government systems, telecommunications, even power grid controllers, and the secure facility with the box isolated and safe. The following morning, when satellite imagery revealed increased military activity at Western bases in neighboring countries, transport aircraft arriving, equipment being moved, and subtle but obvious signs of forces being positioned, the more direct approaches started. Next came diplomatic pressure. The U.S. State Department warned against traveling to Burkina Faso due to reliable information regarding possible terrorist activity. By July 10th, 4 days after discovering the box, the pressure had escalated to the point where the U.S. ambassador finally agreed to his meeting and delivered a message with barely concealed menace after the French government announced a postponement of previously approved development aid and international banks started to question transactions to and from Burkina Faso's central bank. "Mr. President," he stated while seated opposite Traoré, "my government has reason to believe your forces may have recovered sensitive equipment from a crashed aircraft. We would appreciate its immediate return." "I'm not aware of any American aircraft crashing in our territory," Traoré said in a neutral tone. "Perhaps the ambassador's jaw would clench if your government issued an official request to identify which aircraft you lost and which region it went down in, as this is a subject of the utmost importance for national security. Mr. President, serious regional instability could result from the compromise of some intelligence assets." The ambassador's outburst of rage demonstrated that he understood the implications, Mr. President. Burkina Faso is dedicated to regional stability, which is why we're hosting the West African Economic Independence Summit next week. Will your government be sending an observer? It was a purposeful provocation. I have to be clear that there will be serious repercussions once the ambassador leaves if private U.S. government property is not returned within 48 hours. Defense Minister Zongo voiced the concern. They all felt they're accelerating the timetable. This 48 hours deadline would bring us to July 12th, still 4 days before the summit. They don't want the box back, said Intelligence Director Konate. They want to know how much we've learned from it. This deadline is a pressure tactic to force our hand. Before we can coordinate with the other leaders that night, security detected a sophisticated infiltration attempt at the secure facility housing the box. The attackers' professionally trained operatives with advanced equipment were repelled, but the message was clear. Western intelligence agencies were moving to direct action by July 12th, just 4 days before the summit. The situation had escalated dramatically. Satellite imagery showed military forces massing in neighboring Niger, where the U.S. maintained a drone base. French special forces had been spotted across the border in Côte d'Ivoire. Meanwhile, inside Burkina Faso, security forces had detained 3 foreign nationals caught conducting surveillance near the presidential palace. Under questioning, they revealed connections to private military contractors often used by Western intelligence agencies for deniable operations. The pressure was building from all sides, but Traoré remained focused on the approaching summit. The other threatened leaders had taken serious security precautions based on the Black Autumn intelligence, disrupting several planned interventions before they could be launched. 2 top military officers involved in the files were detained by Nigerian President Obi, while Ghanaian President Mensah made changes. 3 days prior to the summit, on the morning of July 13th, Traoré received an urgent call from President Adama of Sagal Ibrahim. My intelligence chief intercepted communications indicating they were moving to Phase Echo tonight. Do you know what that means? His security protocols prevented an ambush that intelligence suggested was planned for his motorcade in Mali, Senegal, and Guinea. Similar preemptive actions had frustrated Western intelligence operations, but the coordination required for these countermeasures had not gone unnoticed. It became increasingly clear to Western intelligence agencies that their Operation Black Autumn had been compromised, and their response was to accelerate rather than retreat. According to the Black Autumn files, Traoré felt cold. If more tactful methods failed, Phase Echo was the designation for direct military action. It means they're abandoning the pretense, he said glumly. How solid is this intelligence? The Black Autumn contingency plan is actually the source, who is close to the French military command. They are preparing for simultaneous strikes throughout the region that are directly targeted at each of us. They are claiming it is a counter-terrorism operation. We need to accelerate our own plans, Traoré told his advisors as soon as he called a meeting of his Security Council. If they're moving to direct military action, we don't have until the 16th anymore, he said. Our strength isn't in conventional military response, he added. It's in changing the narrative the moment this becomes a public confrontation rather than a covert operation. Everything changes. Advance the summit tomorrow. Promptly inform all leaders via secure lines, and get the Black Autumn evidence ready for global distribution. The following day was a flurry of activity as security forces quickly adjusted their protection preparations, while leaders who had originally scheduled their arrival in Ouagadougou for July 15th suddenly rushed to get there. The evidence was prepared for presentation by technical teams. Western intelligence responded with increasing pressure after spotting this unexpected burst of activity, but without knowing its precise nature. International flights were cancelled, owing to security concerns after internet access to Burkina Faso inexplicably stopped working. Satellite communications also encountered disruptions, but Traoré had foreseen these steps. By dawn on July 14th, 7 of the 12 leaders had already reached Ouagadougou, traveling under strict security and occasionally disguising themselves to avoid possible interception. Alternative communication systems had been set up, charter flights from friendly countries were organized for arriving leaders, and a decentralized approach to sharing the Black Autumn evidence was prepared to ensure that no single point of failure could prevent its release. The other 5 were traveling in an unusual manner to evade detection. If security could be maintained for that long, the hastily rescheduled meeting would start at noon. At 10:13 a.m., the first direct attack occurred when a drone struck a government building in Ouagadougou, which Western intelligence assumed would host the summit. The complex was destroyed in the explosion, but the true summit site was somewhere else, a purposeful deception. Everything changed when Traoré carried out this overt act of aggression. Western powers could no longer pretend that their operations were clandestine or restricted to intelligence gathering. Instead, they had launched a military strike against the capital city of a sovereign nation. Traoré kept an eye on the situation from the actual summit site and made the final decision to release the Black Autumn files to all channels worldwide distribution at precisely noon on July 14th. When the 7 arrived, leaders gathered in a secure underground facility on the outskirts of Ouagadougou. The world's media broke out with an unprecedented story at precisely noon on July 14th. At the same time, thousands of journalists were provided with extensive and devastating operational blueprints detailing Operation Black Autumn, the Western plan to violently overthrow West African authority. Reports on surveillance profiles of psychology lists of regional partners, media manipulation tactics, and the schedule for coordinated actions against democratically elected officials. More importantly, the documents exposed the real purpose of Operation Black Autumn, which was to stop the West African Economic Independence Summit from creating a new framework that would lessen Western influence over the region's finances and resources. The videos of the 7 leaders who were already in Ouagadougou, speaking to their countries, and the globe from the secure summit site were made public along with the files. Today we have evidence of what African nations have long suspected, Traoré said in a statement. Western powers speak of democracy, sovereignty, and human rights while actively planning the violent overthrow of elected African governments, whose only crime is seeking economic independence. Senegal's president, Adama, was much more straightforward. When African countries claim authority over their own resources and prospects, this is the contemporary manifestation of colonialism. Western nations react with plots for coups and assassinations. The worldwide response was swift and powerful. Around Africa, demonstrators gathered in front of Western embassies. Investigations were requested by international human rights organizations. Non-Western nations such as China. Even in Western countries, opposition parties and civil society organizations voiced their fury at their government's deceit as the discoveries dominated international news, and Russia and India released statements denouncing the uncovered operation. Western governments were caught completely unprepared by the accelerated timeline and public exposure, and they responded incoherently and contradictorily when the remaining 5 leaders made it to Ouagadougou, despite increased efforts to intercept them. By the evening, all 12 were present, creating a potent symbolic image of unity and defiance. Few observers were persuaded by the initial denials, which were followed by allegations of misconstrued intelligence, and finally, carefully phrased explanations citing valid security concerns. When satellite footage surfaced demonstrating the launch from a U.S. facility in Niger, the drone strike against Ouagadougou, which had been initially denied, became impossible to deny. This physical assault on a sovereign capital, along with the leaked Black Autumn files, caused a diplomatic disaster for Western governments inside the secure summit facility. With Western military forces still in position, but now limited by international exposure and diplomatic pressure, the 12 leaders worked through the night to finalize the economic framework they had initially intended to announce 2 days later. However, by morning, Their agreement would include additional elements addressing security cooperation and mutual defense against external interference. Backlash, the West African Sovereignty Alliance, a comprehensive agreement covering economic cooperation, security cooperation, collaboration, and diplomatic unity, was revealed by the summit participants in a coordinated announcement. The alliance's first action was to demand the immediate removal of all unauthorized Western military personnel from the region with a 72-hour deadline. The second action was to announce the creation of a new regional currency backed by gold reserves, ending the French-controlled CFA franc system that had maintained economic control over former French colonies for decades. The third move was arguably the most significant. It was a formal invitation to non-Western nations like China, Russia, India, and Brazil to build new security and economic alliances founded on respect for one another and non-inference. Western capitals with few options were reeling from the public relations catastrophe and dealing with internal political pressure. Politically speaking, military action that could have been justified as counterterrorism prior to the Black Autumn exposure was now not feasible. By the evening of July 14th, only 8 days after the mysterious black box was discovered, the geopolitical landscape of West Africa had changed, and economic penalties would only hasten the region's shift away from Western financial systems. The 3 months that followed, what became known as the Black Box Revolution, saw significant changes throughout West Africa. Operation Black Autumn, which was intended to preserve Western dominance through synchronized regime change, had instead sparked the same independence it aimed to avert. The 12 summit nations that made up the Western Sovereignty Alliance at first were joined by 3 additional nations. Economic relations were more difficult to understand, but the alliance moved methodically, establishing new trade relationships with non-Western partners, renegotiating resource extraction contracts, and creating regional financial institutions independent of Western control. For Ibrahim Traoré personally, the Black Box Revolution elevated his status from national leader to regional statesman. His decisive handling of the crisis, willingness to take calculated risks, and ability to unite diverse leaders around a common cause established him as the alliance's most prominent voice. The new regional currency, the Sankara, named after Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader Thomas Sankara, launched successfully with its gold backing, providing immediate credibility in international markets. 6 months following the revolution, Traoré invited the other 11 founding leaders to a private celebration in Ouagadougou. They assembled in the same secure location where they had created history, which is now permanently known as the Alliance Coordination Center. The enigmatic black box that had initiated everything was placed in a glass case in the middle of the space, serving as a reminder of how luck, forethought, and bravery had come together to alter history. As they examined the device, Traoré urged his colleagues, "We should never forget how close we came to disaster. If that aircraft hadn't crashed, if our teams hadn't promptly secured the crash site, if Dr. Dio hadn't discovered a way to access the files without setting off the security measures, each of us might be dead or in exile now, and our country's return to effective colonial status." President Obi of Nigeria put a hand on Traoré's shoulder. "It wasn't just luck, Ibrahim. It was also preparedness and the courage to take decisive action." As the commemoration came to an end, they talked about the difficulties that lay ahead. Western powers hadn't given up on their objectives, only their strategies. The fight for true independence would continue for years or even generations, but something fundamental had changed. West African nations were no longer isolated, playing defense against more powerful forces. Instead, they were united, proactive, and increasingly establishing the terms of their international relations. That evening, after the other leaders had left, Traoré returned alone to his office in the presidential palace. On his desk was a framed photo of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary leader of Burkina Faso, who had been assassinated in 1987 during a coup backed by Western powers. It was Dr. Dio, who had been examining the Black Autumn files for more intelligence, Mr. President, she said, her voice tense with excitement. We found something else in the files, something bigger than the assassination plans. Beside the photo was a small piece of metal, a piece of the crashed aircraft that had delivered the black box into their hands. His secure phone rang, interrupting his reflection. What is it? The black box revolution had altered the political landscape, and Traoré felt the weight of this new discovery. He asked financial algorithms for the entire code base for the systems that Western banks use to manipulate currency values, commodity prices, and credit ratings. With this information, we could potentially neutralize their ability to use financial markets as weapons against African economies. He also instructed financial algorithms to secure the data and call a meeting of the Alliance Financial Committee, which could be the next chapter in our independent struggle. Traoré took another glance at Sankara's portrait. The work goes on, he whispered softly to his predecessor's picture. But now we're finally writing our own story. In addition to exposing Western plans for regime change, the black box found accidentally in a downed aircraft also demonstrated how deeply they feared African independence, which validated Traoré's and other progressive African leaders' long-held belief that true sovereignty was achievable but that the road would be challenging. The next chapter of African history would be written by Africans themselves, despite the intense resistance.